First, the Spanish Grand Prix, Max Verstappen in front of Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, his first front row start in 2023. Lando Norris in a best start for McLaren in Spain since 2011 goes third in front of Lewis Hamilton. Then it's Lance Stroll rounding out the top five in front of the Alpine of Esteban Ocon. Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas goes from 7th, and Fernando Alonso with a damaged floor in qualifying goes from 8th place in his Aston Martin. Oscar Piastri makes it 2 McLarens in the top 9. Pierre Gasly with 2 3-place grid penalties for impeding Verstappen and Sainz will start from 10th, and it's Sergio Perez the second time in a row not in Q3 for the Red Bull driver. He'll start 11th in front of George Russell, who struggled in qualifying in his Mercedes. He actually went off on the reconnaissance lap 2. He's in front of Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo. Nick De Vries out-qualifies Yuki Tsunoda in the Alfa Tauri for the second time this year from 14th position, just in front of Tsunoda. Then Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo is 16th. Kevin Magnussen is 17th, and Alex Albon will be the last car on the grid in 18th, because we have 2 cars starting from the pit lane. Charles Leclerc had qualified in 19th, convinced there is something wrong with that McLaren. They have changed everything on the rear end of that Ferrari. He will start from the pit lane, and Logan Sargent will go just behind him in the pit lane too in the Williams, after Williams have elected to change his suspension setup and his brake cooling system. So 2 cars from the pit lane. Mark Priestley, who have you got your eye on?
Well, I've got my eye on everybody behind Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen, of course, starts on pole. Interestingly, he starts on the medium tyre. The only other person that's taking the grid on that medium tyre is his teammate Sergio Perez. Everybody else on the faster soft tyre. And that's interesting because most people, even Pirelli, say the medium tyre was the least preferred of all the 3 tyres bought this weekend, yet Red Bull seem to think differently. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch.
Yes, while the rest of the grid make their way through the final sector, Charles Leclerc patiently waits in his garage with the mechanics holding on to the tyre warmers before they release him to the end of the pit lane. Max Verstappen now making his way around the final corner in what has been a change to the layout here at the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya. We have done away with the old slow chicane that brought all the cars back onto the main straight. It's now 2 double long right-handers which bring you through 13 and 14, and the DRS detection zone is just as you come into turn 14, the final corner. Really going to be interesting to see how that affects the tyre strategy, particularly, Mark, when you have the 2 Red Bulls, Verstappen starting on the medium, everybody else on the softs, and we wait and see what Leclerc and Sargent will do. Yeah,
we're probably expecting a 2-stop race for most people, starting on the soft tyre, then going to perhaps a hard tyre, and then back to a soft tyre towards the end. Of course, Verstappen and Perez will be on a slightly alternate strategy, so keep an eye on it.
Well, the final 2 cars on the grid will be Kevin Magnussen in the Haas, Alex Albon in the Williams, 2 in the pit lane. 2 home drivers that the fans are cheering on. The grandstands are full with a sea of green for Fernando Alonso and his Aston Martin, and a sea of red for Carlos Sainz in his Ferrari, who will start from 2nd position in this race. But it will be Max Verstappen who will go from pole position at the scene where he achieved his first career Grand Prix victory. It's a green flag at the back of the pack. It's all eyes to the lights, and it's foot to the floor as we go racing in Spain. It's a fairly even start between the top 2, but Verstappen has the edge. He has to cut across Carlos Sainz, who now ducks in to the other side of Max Verstappen. He'll have the outside line while the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso dices with Lando Norris. Sainz tries it around the outside. Verstappen has absolutely none of it. There's a bit of contact further back in the pack. Verstappen makes his domination clear and leads coming out of turns 1 and 2 as we head into turn 4 now. Sainz just on the back of him. Then comes Lewis Hamilton down the inside of, that would be Lance Stroll and the Aston Martin. The 2 go wheel to wheel as we approach the downhill left-hander of turn 5. It's Stroll on the inside. Hamilton has shown the door. He cannot get through. Stroll makes his way up into 3rd position now, but Hamilton, the 7-time champion, is chasing him down.
Yeah, it was a great start from Alonso up into P3. The contact was actually Hamilton and Lando Norris, and it looks like Lando Norris coming off worse with that. He's dropped back in the pack, now down into P5 after starting P3. On the radio to his team already, saying he's got damage. Lewis Hamilton, though, continues up in 3rd place.
Sergio Perez further back in the pack, tries it down the inside of turn 10 on Oscar Piastri. Perez has lost a couple of positions. He's lost 1 position down into 12th, trying to get back ahead of the McLaren while trying to keep Yuki Tsunoda in the Alfa Tauri behind. It's not been the start that Perez wanted. The contact was indeed with Lando Norris, who has damage as he comes into the pit lane for repair work. That promotes everybody up a position behind him.
Yeah, correction. I said Alonso's up into third. Of course, it's actually Lance Stroll. So it's the younger teammate, Lance Stroll, doing better than his more experienced Spanish teammate Alonso. Alonso in sixth, Stroll third. Positions changing again. Still Max Verstappen way out in front, over a second from the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. Lance Stroll, then Lewis Hamilton and Esteban Ocon, and Lando Norris into the pits with that damage from the contact with Hamilton.
Yeah, it's a long stop as well. Front wing change, and there is smoke coming from the front brakes as well. He's eventually released a 17.6 second pit stop time. Disaster for Lando Norris, who started so well up in third for McLaren. A real shame for him. Sergio Perez, meanwhile, does manage to get through on Oscar Piastri, who made his way through into turn one. There's still battles going on throughout the grid, though. Let's have a look at what's going on between Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin and George Russell. Alonso started 8th. He's already up to 6th place. He's just got through on George Russell as they now make their way into the braking zone of turn 10 and back into the final tricky sector of this lap as we come towards the end of lap 2. It's full time at the rugby. Let's go to Dave Woods.
Yeah, first game of the second air Magic's finished. Lee 30, Wakefield 4, Lachlan Lamb with a couple of tries, Josh Charnley with his 16th Super League try of the season. It's 6 successive wins for Lee. Wakefield woeful. Lee 30, Wakefield 4.
Thanks, Dave. Start of lap 3 then. Max Verstappen leads. Carlos Sainz in second, 1.5 seconds behind. Then it's Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin third. Hamilton behind him. Ocon the top 5. Alonso, Russell, Hulkenberg, Zhou Guanyu, Sergio Perez now up into the top 10 and last of the points paying positions at the moment. Then it's Piastri, Tsunoda, Magnussen, Gasly, Nick de Vries the top 15. Albon, Bottas, Sargent, Leclerc and Lando Norris having to come into the pits for damage to that front wing is now 20th and last as we get another look at how the start paid out, and it was a great start further back in the pack for George Russell, the Mercedes, who stormed off the line.
Yeah, really strong start for Russell, which has put him in a great position now, up into P7 and really challenging Alonso. Also a great start for Carlos Sainz, and there was a moment when I thought he was going to go around the outside of Verstappen, just thought better off it. Verstappen, quite aggressive as he always is, wasn't going to let off the throttle and just held his foot into keeping the first place as he comes through turn 1.
Yeah, it was Norris, that was where he picked up his front wing damage with Lewis Hamilton as the inside corner of the apex coming out of turn 2 just tightens up, and that was where the contact was had. This is the sound on board with the British racer for McLaren. It was actually an all-right start, Mark.
It was a decent start from Lando Norris, but it was Lewis Hamilton who got a really strong start and ended up alongside the McLaren of Lando Norris, outbraked him into turn 1. Norris tucks in just behind, and as they break into turn 2, it was the left rear wheel of Hamilton making contact with the front wing of Norris. Could have been nasty, and Lewis actually very lucky to get away without a puncture.
Yeah, the inside curve quite high up as well. Really takes a beating on these Formula 1 cars. This is the sound of Carlos Sainz, the Spanish racer on home soil, started second, really managed to get up alongside. He was on the soft tyre and Verstappen on the medium, and they almost both run each other out onto the exit of turn 1. Verstappen really aggressive there to make sure the Spaniard could not get by. So Carlos Sainz had to settle for second. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton was behind and up into third, but then Lance Stroll with a great move in the Aston Martin down the inside, the left-hander at turn 5, managed to get the 7-time champion, and Stroll still holds on into third. It's Verstappen, Sainz, Stroll, Hamilton and Ocon, the top 5.
And you know, I just spotted something else on that replay of the start. One of the reasons George Russell has catapulted himself up into P7, he had a great start, but he then went off at the exit of turn 1, took the escape road, you have to follow that path all the way through turn 2, and actually gained some places by going down the escape road as everybody else bunched up through turn 2.
Further back in the pack, some great starts for the likes of Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo. He's made up 4 positions up into 9th. Tsunoda up into 11th. Magnussen has made up 4 positions up into 13th. The big loss is actually Pierre Gasly, down 4 spots. He had the penalty, started in 10th, made his way all the way down. As Zhou Guanyu continues his good form so far, makes a great move on the Haas of Nico Hulkenberg, down the main straight, nice bit of toe, DRS enabled as well, and makes the move into turn 1. Hulkenberg, the German racer, who is not at the best of form around Spain, had a great qualifying, got moved up a position and started from 7th on the grid. He's just lost 8th to Zhou Guanyu. He's now under pressure from Sergio Perez, who has made up a position now up into 10th, but is not making the gains as quickly as he would like. He'll have to try and make a move as they come into the approach of the back straight where DRS will be enabled. They make their way uphill now towards the blind right-hander of turn 9, which leads you out onto that straight.
Yeah, and George Russell, I think, is going to be in trouble. So where I just spotted him making all those moves past everybody else down the escape road, so the stewards. So he's now under investigation for that. So they'll take a closer look. And I think, from what I could see, it was a slam dunk. So keep an eye on that one. Sergio Perez now into P10. Now, this is going to start getting interesting because on lap 5, of course, we've now got DRS enabled. We know how good that Red Bull is with its DRS wide open. We've now got 2 very fast sweeping right-handers that lead onto the start-finish straight, which give you an even greater top speed by the time you get down to the end of that straight, and that's where the Red Bull will come alive. So Perez now right behind Nico Hülkenberg with his DRS wide open and makes that move into turn 1.
Yeah, nice and easy in the end. Moves to the right-hand side, DRS open, late on the brakes as the Mexican sweeps round Nico Hülkenberg. Perez up to 9th, Hülkenberg down to 10th. Yuki Tsunoda is on a mission as well behind these two in the Alpha Tauri. He's in 11th and catching quickly. Lap 6 of 66 here in Barcelona. It's Max Verstappen, the reigning champion, who leads by 2.8 seconds. He's on the medium compounder tyre. Everybody else, bar his teammate and Logan Sargent, is also on the soft tyre. Carlos Sainz in second, Stroll third, Hamilton fourth, Ocon the top 5. Then it's Alonso, Russell, Zhou Guanyu, Perez, Hülkenberg the top 10, Tsunoda, Piastri, Magnussen, Gasly, De Vries the top 15, Albon, Leclerc, who started from the pit lane. He's out there on the hard tyre. He's made his way up into 17th position in front of Sargent, who started on the medium from the pit lane. Bottas has just come in for a pit stop. That's an early stop for the Alfa Romeo. He's down in 19th, only ahead of Lando Norris in the McLaren, who started third. But contact with Lewis Hamilton into turn 1 saw him have to come into the pit lane for a front wing change.
Yeah, so we're expecting, if the strategy falls the way that Pirelli and most people expect it to, we're expecting the first round of pit stops to come around lap 13, 14, 15 for the guys on the softer tyre. That's almost everybody apart from the 2 Red Bulls and, like you said, Charles Leclerc at the back. Around 13, 14, that's going to make a stop possibly onto the hard tyre for everybody that's on the soft. Then they'll run long right towards the end of the race and probably then have to come in again for another set of soft tyres to get them to the finish. The Red Bull of Verstappen and Perez on the medium tyre should be able to run a little bit longer. And if they can make that tyre work, which at the moment they seem to be able to do, it just opens up the strategic options. They can copy everybody else, they can cover them off, or they can run long and go on a slightly different strategy. To be honest, their car's so fast, they could probably do anything in the hands of Verstappen, couldn't they?
Well, we did warn you that Max Verstappen, if he got away well, would probably dominate this race. 3 seconds now the gap, but I can assure you there's some excellent battles going on in the mid-pack. Russell and Alonso are involved in a great little scrap right now over 6th and 7th. Alonso in behind George Russell, but then just behind them in that battle for 9th is Sergio Perez with Yuki Tsunoda, Hülkenberg, Piastri all involved in that too. And in fact, while that's been going on, it has been said that Russell did manage to get through on Alonso, but I think that's gone back the other way now. So Alonso now up into 7th, Russell through on Alonso up into 6th. That was down into turn 1, I think, and they're still going hard at it. Alonso in front for the time being. He has to move to the defensive line. Further up front though, we have Lewis Hamilton and Lance Stroll fighting for position. This is for the final spot on the podium into turn 1, and it's Lewis Hamilton who gets the better of Lance Stroll, now up into 3rd. Further back, this is the sound of the McLaren of Oscar Piastri fighting over 11th place with Nico Hülkenberg, who has fallen outside of the points now. He's trying to catch up, but Piastri is through on the German. Tsunoda through as well. Tsunoda currently occupies 10th and the last points playing position. Then it's Piastri, then it's Hülkenberg, and behind him, his teammate Kevin Magnussen is 13th at the moment. Verstappen leads Sainz, 3.7 seconds to gap.
Yeah, Verstappen looking comfortable, opening that gap up now, so there's no major threat from behind. He can now run his own race, he can kind of do his own thing. He's got nothing particularly to worry about, he's just got to look after his tyres and see that car to the end, barring any problems. Hamilton, though, really strong start to this Grand Prix, up into P3 in a Mercedes that really we didn't think would be anywhere near matching the pace. Even Lewis Hamilton didn't think he'd be anywhere near matching the pace of the top 3, let alone the top 10 at one stage this weekend, so a really good start for him.
No, he said he was having to eat his words a bit after qualifying, saying he wouldn't get through to the top 10. Well, not only that, he qualified 4th and is now up into the podium positions. Has already had one podium so far this year, trying to make it 2 for the 7-time champion. Carlos Sainz holding well in 2nd, 4 seconds the gap now between him and Verstappen. this is the sound of Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez, who is trying to get through on Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo with the use of DRS and a bit of tow. Makes his move round the outside into turn 1 and gets through on the Chinese racer. Sergio Perez up into 8th and Zhou Guanyu down into 9th. But it's been a fairly good start for Zhou Guanyu. Started outside of the top 10, down in 13th, and made a great start to the points. His Sainz
on plan A for now.
Yeah, happy. I have racing on.
So Carlos Sainz is happy, saying he's got more to come from these set of soft tyres, which if Pirelli's data is to go by, maybe around the lap 13, 18 mark, possibly lap 20, we can see our first pit stops for the soft tyre runners. We're currently on lap number 9. Meanwhile, Mark, some good news for George Russell. That turn 1 incident, gaining advantage, nothing going to happen with that one.
Yeah, I guess because it was the first lap and it was slightly chaotic, as it always is for the first couple of corners, as they sometimes do, giving a little bit of extra leeway through there. So good news for Russell. That puts him in a decent position. P6 and battling right behind Esteban Ocon. Esteban Ocon also in a decent spot there. P5, that's really a sign of just how good that car is right now. It's shown a bit of form recently. Great result last time out in Monaco, but now coming under some threat with George Russell with his DRS wing wide open right behind him. Not close enough this time into turn 1.
It was a good start from Ocon. Conversely, though, for Pierre Gasly, all the way down the field and outside the points after starting in 10th. It was a better qualifying position than that, but penalties saw him fall down the field. That is the sound of Zhou Guanyu, who has just made a pit stop, and he just comes out behind Nick de Vries, who is making his way to the AlphaTauri pit box. So here we go then. Zhou Guanyu makes his way out, and I think he's gone on to the hard tyre for Zhou Guanyu, the Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, so what we must be seeing here, certainly on some cars at least, is higher than expected degradation on these tyres.
Yeah, this is early. We're on lap 10.
It is early. Lap 9 and 10 for the first few pit stops, and that's 2 or 3 now that have had to come in and make a change off that soft tyre, moving on to the hard tyre, the much more durable tyre that'll last the majority of this race. But that's earlier than expected. Now, is that going to start affecting everybody in the same way? Can Verstappen on his medium tyres and Perez on their medium tyres, can they go longer? Does it even matter for Verstappen? But certainly for Perez, he's in a battle now in P8, trying to work his way to the front in a faster car. But can he manage that tyre, that medium tyre that nobody really liked over the course of Friday? And can he make it last until he can get onto probably the hard tyre to see him then through to the latter stages of this Grand Prix?
We were mentioned a moment ago how well Esteban Ocon in the Alpine was doing. He's up in 5th, but I fear he's about to lose that. And it's a late dive down the inside for George Russell in the Mercedes, who gets the move done on the Frenchman on the exit of turn 2 as we come through the long right-hander of turn 3. Can Ocon try and stick with him? No, he can't. George Russell with an excellent move to get his Mercedes up into the top 5 here in Spain. It's the Spanish Grand Prix. It's lap 11. Max Verstappen leads Carlos Sainz by 5.3 seconds. Hamilton is in 3rd, Stroll 4th, then comes Russell 5th. It's Ocon in 6th. A great battle currently ensuing between Alonso now in 7th and Sergio Perez in 8th. Piastri and Gasly round out the point scorers.
Yeah, 2 more cars into the pits. Sonoda and one other, didn't see who it was. 2 cars coming for earlier pit stops than expected, as we talked about. So hard tyres becoming the tyre of choice for the middle stint of this race, perhaps as expected, just happening a bit earlier. Great start to this Grand Prix for both Mercedes cars, isn't it? We know that Lewis Hamilton had a decent qualifying. We expected him to, at least in the early stages, run high, but George Russell now joining him up in P5, so really strong start for the team.
I think it was Kevin Magnussen who pitted as well, meanwhile the other Haas on track fighting with Zhou Guanyu and well, sliding through 2 cars for Nico Hülkenberg. First he gets Zhou Guanyu, and then he's treated to Yuki Tsunoda, who is in the AlphaTauri, just coming out of the pit lane entry, and he quite literally threads the needle between the 2 and makes his way past both of them into turn 1. Good driving there from Nico Hülkenberg, who I believe now has come into the pit. So these early stoppers, then, Mark, could well be seeing a 3-stop strategy in play. Well,
we could be, and I've just noticed actually Hülkenberg has put the medium tyre on, so that's not what we were expecting either. So perhaps, when you're in this stage of the race, at this part of the racetrack, Hülkenberg currently in P14, you know, you're mid-pack, you might as well try something. So going onto a medium tyre with a little bit more performance, temperatures, I guess, similar to what we saw on Friday when the longer runs were being done. No one really doing long runs on the hard tyre on Friday, other than the experimental tyre that Pirelli brought ahead of an introduction at the British Grand Prix. So that hard tyre is a little bit of an unknown for everybody. We know it's going to be durable, we know it'll last, but we also know it's going to have slightly less performance. So maybe just switching onto that medium tyre for the likes of Hulkenberg, the likes of Logan Sargent, might just give them something over their main rivals in that mid-pack.
Yeah, Magnussen, Hulkenberg's teammate, doing the exact same thing as well, going on to the medium tyre. So those that have stopped then, it's Hulkenberg basically from 14th down. Hulkenberg, Zhou Guanyu, Tsunoda, Bottas, De Vries, Magnussen and Lando Norris had that early stop for damage. Everybody else is still yet to come into the pit, so that will... the order will unfurl as we head over to the next few laps. This is the sound of Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, who started from the pit lane and after pit stops has made his way up into 11th spot right now. He is on the hard tyre, so he, Mark, is going as far into this race as he can. Yeah, and that's going to be another interesting one to watch. We know that that Ferrari has got some pace in it. Let's see from Carlos Sainz.
And switch positions, Sierra on third, and status 4. Stay patient. This is good. Okay, understood. You need to pick up the pace.
Carlos Sainz there being told perhaps a switch in strategy, but overruling and saying, well, no, we've got to be patient to his team. And we know, we talked about it time and time again, strategy and Ferrari doesn't always go hand in hand. Carlos Sainz has often at times overruled his team, and he's doing so there. He's 6 seconds behind Verstappen right now in second place. Also interesting, they've got a difference of opinion about the pace there, haven't they? Carlos Sainz saying pace is good, and his team coming back saying, no, you need to up your pace if we're going to go on this strategy. So both having slightly different opinions of how things are going so far. But the Ferrari has had pace at times, we know that, but the race day is when it's really struggled, and they brought a big raft of changes, mostly aerodynamic, to this Grand Prix in the hope that it's going to make the car more drivable on a Sunday. Leclerc starting so far back, in fact starting from the pit lane, might give us the perfect opportunity to see whether that car is indeed more drivable, because that's what he needs today. Into the pits then comes Esteban Ocon in the Alpine. He gets rid of his soft tyres at the end of lap 13 and the start of lap 14, and he has gone on to, I think it was the mediums, the yellow wall tyre. So that is an interesting one, because that would insinuate that he is going to have another stop. Well, I think everyone's going to have at least one more stop. Sorry, Mark, just getting a little bit tight down in turn one as Ocon comes out of the pit lane entry, just in front of Nico Hulkenberg, who's forced to check up to avoid hitting the back of the Alpine. But Hulkenberg is looking all over his mirrors, because he's got the Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu and the Alfa Tauri of Yuki Tsunoda doing battle side by side. They're making their way now towards the left-hander of turn 5, and this is all over right now. It's 13th position, Ocon, 14th Hulkenberg, 15th Tsunoda, 16th Zhou Guanyu. It's a great little battle, isn't it? Yeah, I think everyone's going to have to make at least one more stop over the course of this Grand Prix. It's quite a rough tarmac, this racetrack. We've now got 2 very fast, even faster corners, high-energy corners coming through the final part of the lap. That takes more life out of the tyres on every single lap. And with it being an abrasive surface, it really does just eat away at those tyres. It degrades the performance and it wears them much more heavily than other tracks. So there is very little chance, I think, of most people getting to the end of this race with one stop. So as Stroll comes in for his first, I think everyone's going to have to make at least 2. The question is, does anyone need 3? The big question indeed. Lance Stroll comes into the pits and he heads out onto a set of soft tyres for Lance Stroll, another set. So going at the other way for Lance Stroll, he comes out in the mid-pack. We were telling you about that fight over 14th, that fierce battle. Tsunoda has now gotten through on Nico Hulkenberg. Zhou Guanyu still hanging in there in a 16th spot at the moment. It's lap 15 of 66 here for the 6th race of the Formula 1 season in 2023. We're on lap 15, and Max Verstappen leads 7.6 seconds the gap to Carlos Sainz. Then it's Lewis Hamilton, George Russell and Fernando Alonso round out the top 5. Perez, Piastri, Gasly, Leclerc and Albon the top 10. Sargent, Stroll, Ocon, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg the top 15. Then it's Zhou Guanyu, Magnussen, De Vries, Bottas and Norris the top 20. His signs.
I'm thinking to go to medium and box Carlos box for medium.
Here we go then. So Carlos Sainz does indeed come into the pits and he's going to go onto the medium tyre. Meanwhile, Lance Stroll, who pitted 1 lap ago, makes his way through on Logan Sargent, who is still out there, hasn't pitted yet. He started from the pit lane in that Williams, so the Aston Martin goes through up into 11th. It's an okay stop time for Carlos Sainz, 2.9 seconds.
Why? Okay.
Did he say why okay?
I didn't hear what you said there, sorry.
Well, he's clearly questioning it, and he's going to come out of the pit lane. That was Carlos Sainz, by the way. He's going to come out of the pit lane behind his teammate Charles Leclerc. So Sainz has gone onto the medium tyre. Leclerc up into 8th, still out there, having started from the pit lane on the hard tyre, and it's just going to keep on going until he has to come in. This is the sound of Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo down the inside of the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg. Quite aggressive there from the Alfa Romeo driver, up into 15th. Finally makes the move stick. Unfortunately for Nico Hülkenberg, he has been going backwards in this race. Nico Hülkenberg has indeed pitted, as is his teammate.
It's still really good, mate. Okay, let's keep him that way. Pace is looking really good, Lewis.
That was Hamilton on the radio, Mark, so he's happy.
Well, this is an interesting battle here because Sainz was just ahead of Hamilton, had to cover off, make sure Lewis couldn't undercut him. The undercut around here is quite powerful because of that abrasive surface and the degradation on tyres. That meant that if Sainz stayed out for an extra few laps, with Hamilton so close, Hamilton could have dived into the pits, got a fresh set of tyres, and used the performance of those new tyres to catapult him over his outlap. Sainz had to cover that off, so Sainz has now dove into the pits to get his fresh tyres on. He's now got to put in a blistering outlap, but Hamilton talking about how good his tyres still are. So is Hamilton going to jump over Carlos Sainz by the overcut through this series of pit stops?
This is going to be fascinating as Charles Leclerc comes into the pits. That was the voice of the former McLaren mechanic Mark Prix alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. We're roughly a quarter race distance here at the Spanish Grand Prix. Let's bring in the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson. Andrew, what have you made of the 17 laps that we've seen so far?
Well, we're heading into a really interesting stage of the race here because I think Carlos Sainz was clearly questioning the decision of the Ferrari strategist to put the medium. The hard tyre was expected to be the favoured tyre in this race. Soft, hard was the sort of predicted fastest strategy, and that's obviously what Sainz was expecting because he was like, why? When they said medium, he acquiesced. But we'll have to see how that plays out with Hamilton, who's obviously going to try to overcut Sainz, or at least maybe try and get a tyre offset for the end of the race. Meanwhile, they've just pitted Leclerc, Ferrari, which I really don't understand, because he started on the hard tyre, and he's run a relatively short distance into the race, and they've just made him pit and put on another set of tyres. So that's very confusing. Meanwhile, just behind the top three, Verstappen, Hamilton, Russell, the two Mercedes drivers are showing pretty good pace, actually. They'll be encouraged, I think, so far with their upgrade. Fernando Alonso, I thought, was struggling in the early laps. He's running 4th at the moment after some people pitting in front of him. But he's managing to hold off Sergio Perez behind him in the Red Bull, and he's upped his pace a little bit. So maybe he was just playing a canny game there, keeping his tyres in good shape and trying to build his speed up as we get into this pit stop period now.
Well, if anyone's going to play a canny game, it's probably going to be Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. We're just hearing Oscar Piastri in the McLaren, who was in the points. He comes into the pit lane for a change of tyres, and he will feed out into a little bit of traffic. He'll come behind the Haas of Magnussen and the AlphaTauri of De Vries, so he comes out in about 15th position. Max Verstappen, who leads this race and has led every lap so far from pole position on the medium tyre, now has a 7.9 second gap, or an 7.8 second gap, I should say, ahead of Lewis Hamilton, who has yet to stop, in front of George Russell, Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez, recovering from 11th on the grid, now up into the top 5.
And that timing of Lewis Hamilton's stop is going to be an interesting one. There's currently, between Hamilton and Sainz, around 22 seconds. Guess how long it takes to make a pit stop in here?
Is it 22 seconds?
It's around 22 seconds. So when they do come back out, after Hamilton is forced to make his pit stop, which he eventually will, it's going to be very, very tight. And he's trying to use the performance of that soft tyre, even though it's starting to go away, up against the fresh set of mediums that's on Sainz's tyre, to just build that gap more than 22 seconds.
A lot more pace in these tyres. Need to look forward, not behind. Yeah, Aether.
That's Russell on the radio. Meanwhile, we're listening to Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari swoop down the inside of Pierre Gasly, and he makes his way up into 6th spot, does the Spaniard. Gasly down to 7th. Gasly yet to stop, started 10th and really plummeted down the order in the early stages of the race. We're not entirely sure why, but clearly not a great start from the Frenchman, but he is now trying to stay out there as long as he can on the soft, hoping something might happen later on in this race, which might cheapen his pit stop slightly if we do get any kind of safety car, virtual safety car or whatnot. But so far, apart from that first skirmish between Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton in turn 1, it's been fairly clean.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, everyone on their best behaviour so far. The field's starting to spread out, but of course the pit stops do mix all of that up again. It puts everybody back out of order, out of position again. Cars coming out of the pits in the middle of other battles. So the potential for things like that to happen at this stage of the race is perhaps higher at any point other than at the start.
Yeah, Leclerc fed out into 17th position behind Bottas and just in front of Norris. This is the sound of Oscar Piastri on board, the Australian rookie for McLaren, making his way down the inside of Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo to get himself up into 15th spot. So Leclerc down in 17th, just in front of Norris. Meanwhile, Fernando Alonso comes into the pits for his first stop. He's going on to the soft tyre, the fastest rubber out there. Gasly also into the pits. Like a little bit of a slow stop on the rear there. It was a slow stop, 3.9 compared to Alonso's. I think it was 2.7. Alonso's going to feed out in his Aston Martin, just behind Zhou Guanyu in 10th place. And Gasly at the pit exit now, and he's gone onto the medium tyre. He comes out just in front of Leclerc over 15th and 16th. But scratch that, Leclerc swoops round the outside of Gasly into turn one. Much warmer tyres, up to temperature. Leclerc made that one look easy, and Gasly's now going to have a bit of a mission on his hands to keep the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas, who is hot on his heels, behind him.
Well, I was just looking at the timing of that Leclerc pit stop. As Andrew said, it was slightly curious, given that he started the hard tyre. You'd expect him to go way longer into the race. And the only thing I could think was that he was coming up to a huge bunch of traffic, and they wanted to pit him to put it into some clear air. But that hasn't happened. He's come out right behind a series of back markers. He's now got to fight his way through, losing time and taking valuable life out of the fresh tyres he's got.
You don't think one stop is possible? Tyres are holding quite well at the moment. It's not impossible. It's not impossible. I think we need to stay out. It's your choice. The tyres are good. I'm improving the lap time.
Wow, okay, so George Russell thinks he might be able to get away with a one stop then. He's up in third at the moment. He's on the soft compound of tyre. That's going to be asking a lot, though, of those tyres to get to, well, they get to go half distance or just over that.
It's a big ask, and it's one that's unexpected. Even Pirelli didn't think that would be possible, but also everyone else who we thought was going to go onto the hard tyre after their first stop, choosing not to, and a lot of people choosing to abandon that and go medium. So it feels like in these temperatures, the harder tyre, which is the only one that George Russell could take if he was going to go to the end, it feels like that's the least preferred on this day in these conditions. So interesting, but great news for him that the soft tyre, having gone all the way from the start, 22 laps into the race, is still holding out.
This is the sound of Pierre Gasly, who came into his pit stop a couple of laps ago, and they've slowed it right down, and it was just a delay
on the right front.
Yeah, and then the front jack removed with a bit of delay, so that cost Gasly in a race that is not going his way either. And then he immediately got nicked by Charles Leclerc, the Monegasque racer, who was coming into turn one as Gasly was coming out of the pit lane. Let's give you a rundown then of the order currently as it stands, with the only drivers not yet to pit being the top four. Verstappen leads 9.2 seconds, Hamilton, Russell, Perez the top four. Then it's Sainz, Stroll, Ocon, Tsunoda, Alonso, Zhou Guanyu the top 10. Hulkenberg is 11th, but I think he's just been overtaken by Oscar Piastri, so Hulkenberg down to 12th in front of Magnussen, De Vries, Gasly the top 15, Leclerc, Bottas, Norris, Albon, Sargent 20th and last.
Yes, I'm still keeping a very close eye on that Hamilton-Sainz battle. Hamilton still yet to pit, so both Mercedes running on the soft tyres that they started the race on. I don't think anybody expected those tyres to be able to go this far. That's a real positive from Mercedes that had a raft of upgrades in Monaco, but this being the first real test of those, has it proven that those upgrades have helped them to look after the tyres on a circuit notoriously difficult to do so? Either way, that's putting them in a really good position as the race unfolds. But Hamilton versus Sainz is the real battle for the podium that we're keeping a close eye on. Sainz having made his pit stop, Hamilton not doing so yet, and still just about on the cusp, but I think just in the safe zone of being able to make a pit stop and still just about come out in front of Sainz.
I think Gasly got back through on Leclerc. I know it's only 15th and 16th, but at the moment it's Leclerc who fell back behind now into 16th. So Leclerc's day not going quite the way he wanted, but that all stems from qualifying. They changed the rear end of that Ferrari, and I hope they would find something. But at the moment. He's not exactly carving his way through the field. Meanwhile, the Red Bull of Sergio Perez, who started in 11th spot, is now up into 4th. He still has to make a pit stop along with Russell, Hamilton and Verstappen, who make up that top 4. This is indeed the sound of the Alpine racer, Pierre Gasly, down in 15th, now hunting down Nick De Vries, who himself was having a good battle with the Haas in front of Kevin Magnussen. De Vries has to go defensive into turn 1. Gasly sweeps round the outside. That becomes the inside as they approach the long right-hander of turn 3. Nice move from Gasly to get himself up in front of Nick De Vries. That's 14th and 15th position. Leclerc just sitting back and watching this. He's not really troubling them at the moment. He's behind in that Ferrari as they all now try and find a way through on Kevin Magnussen, who's a little bit of a cork in the bottle of that scrum currently in 13th place.
Yeah, Pierre Gasly, we know that car's got pace in it. In qualifying before all of his penalties, he actually had a pretty strong showing. His teammate Esteban Ocon also looking really good over the course of this weekend. He's been put so far out of position with the penalties and his disastrous starts of the Grand Prix, but the car inherently has pace, and he's now probably having lots of fun, even though he's a long way back in the pack, trying to weave his way through. But on the flip side of that, the Ferrari, who he's just overtaken, the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, incredibly disappointing performance on that side of that Ferrari garage, isn't it, today?
We've seen this before, though, not too long ago in Miami, where he was trying to get through on Kevin Magnussen time and time again in the Haas. He got through, Magnussen then was able to overtake him. Leclerc back through, K-Mag in the Haas once again able to get through on a Ferrari, and as much respect I have for Haas and the Ferrari, it shouldn't be constantly getting through on a much quicker car, and this battle's still enraging, but Leclerc is at the back of this gaggle of cars in 16th position as Gasly makes up another move. He does get through on Magnussen, so it's Gasly now in 13th, Magnussen 14th, De Vries 15th, Leclerc 16th, and it's all for no points, purely pride.
Well, we know that Charles Leclerc had a disastrous qualifying. He talked about being a problem with the car, something not feeling right, something quite serious that he could feel inside that car that just wasn't working. That meant the team had to search overnight, didn't have time to change everything, didn't have time to find the actual problem, so they changed the entire back end of the car. Not sure if it's actually helped him, so I don't know what the problem is, but he's really struggling as Hamilton comes in for that crucial pit stop.
Softs go off, mediums go on then for the 7-time champion. It's a nice, clean-ish stop, about 3 seconds stop time for Hamilton. Perez goes through up into 3rd. We'll wait and see where Hamilton peels out. Here he comes. Sainz well and truly through into the braking zone already of turn 1 in that Ferrari, but crucially, Sainz is also on the medium tyre, but they'll be a few laps older than Lewis Hamilton. So Hamilton will eventually have the tyre advantage in this stint of the Grand Prix.
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting thing as this stint plays out, in that there's a lot fresher tyre on that the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton. So can he close the gap? This is a really interesting tyre picture forming, actually. I know we keep saying it, but it's very different from the one that everybody expected and the one that even Pirelli, the makers of these tyres, expected coming into today. So very little use of the hard tyre. I guess the big question now is George Russell, currently running in 2nd place on the same soft tyres that he started this Grand Prix 26 laps ago. Nobody expected those tyres to go that far. Is he going to be able to get onto that hard tyre and crucially get it warmed up and make it work to get him to the end of this Grand Prix?
How is he able to keep these tyres alive, though? Because, well, as I say that, we're hearing that George Russell is boxing, so he's obviously not able to keep them alive so much. This is the sound of Pierre Gasly just getting through on Nick De Vries a little earlier on. So Hamilton pitted last lap around. Now his teammate George Russell has come into the pits. That only leaves the 2 Red Bulls out there who have yet to stop. They are running the medium compound of tyre. This is the sound of Russell screeching away out of the Mercedes pit box, and he has gone onto the medium tyre, much like his teammate. But Hamilton flies on through. This is going to be tight, though, between Russell and Lance Stroll, the Aston Martin, who is driving down the main straight, eases past the British racer, and the Stroll of Aston Martin goes through into turn 1. Can Ocon do the same? He'll be on much quicker tyres.
So what's interesting here is, did George Russell stay out a bit too long? Did he try and go for the one stop, which probably would have imagined he'd had to go on the hard tyre to get to the end of the race, and therefore did he extend his tyre whilst losing so much time that he's now found himself dropped back into 6th place? I wonder if he'd stopped a little bit earlier and gone for that medium with a view to taking another stop later on, whether he could have maximised the performance. Did a great job of making that soft tyre last, but did it come at the cost of a couple of places, given that he's now on the medium?
Max Verstappen comes into the pits eventually, now lap 26, start of lap 27, and Verstappen makes his way out and he could potentially be doing the one-stop here for Max Verstappen, because he's made these tyres last. He was on the medium compound tyre. He's made those last until lap 27 essentially, and he's come out on the hard tyre. He could go to the end now.
He could, and we said this right at the start. He's given himself the option by going medium as opposed to everyone else around him going soft at the start. He was able to run long, and if we haven't got quite the same level of degradation we expected, he's now put himself into a position where he can throw the hard tyres on and run to the end. So I think that's a masterstroke.
Well, Verstappen comes out of the pits. He's still got 6 seconds over his teammate Sergio Perez, who is now the only driver yet to pit. So that's 27 of 66. We've got an update at Rugby League. Let's head to Dave Woods.
Yeah, game 2, day 2 of the Magic Weekend, and Huddersfield leads St Helens by 6 points to 0 with 10 minutes played. The try scored by Kevin Nagama, but Saints have just got one back because Conrad Harrell has managed to bustle his way over. It's not given yet by the referee. We'll go to the video ref. But at the moment it remains Huddersfield 6, St Helens 0, but St Helens have a video ref decision to come.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Look forward to more updates on that as it goes. Welcome back, lap 27 of the Spanish Grand Prix here on BBC Radio 5 Live with myself, Harry Benjamin. The former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley is here, along with the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. Max Verstappen leads, 7.6 seconds the gap to his teammate Sergio Perez, who has yet to pit. Then it's Sainz in third, Hamilton fourth, Lance Stroll makes up the top 5. Russell, here he is, he's in 6th.
Rain at turn 5.
Well, there we go.
Hello.
We kind of haven't really talked about the rain, because although the clouds were looking ominous, it was a 40% chance. No one was really amping it up. But there we have it. Could we get a little bit of rain interference here? There are grey clouds that loom over the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya track, but there's also blue sky in the distance as well. It's a really tricky scenario to be in as Sergio Perez comes into the pits. He changes on to I think it was the hard as well, same as his teammate. Now that promotes Hamilton up into second, 10.8 seconds back from our leader Max Verstappen, with rain potential at turn 5.
Well, Hamilton actually just got past Carlos Sainz. We haven't yet seen it. In fact, we're about to see a replay here. It was DRS down the start-finish straight in towards turn 1, comes up underneath the rear wing of the Ferrari and out breaks him down the inside into turn 1. Nice and clean, nice and easy, using the speed of that Mercedes. It's having a real good showing this afternoon, and he is back up into second place. The Mercedes looking good right now, eh?
Yeah, we were a bit worried in practice, because the Mercedes upgrades that were introduced, the new concept of car introduced in Monaco, this was going to be the first telling signs of how well it was. And in practice, particularly George Russell also echoing it through to qualifying, they weren't particularly convinced, neither were we. But now Hamilton in that Mercedes absolutely ragging it up into P2 right now. Carlos Sainz in that Ferrari also running new upgrades. They've gone for a new side pod concept, which is a big deal for Ferrari. He's fallen down to third, and he didn't really fight it going into turn 1 either. Writing on the wall, perhaps, for the man from Madrid. But that is your top 3 currently, with George Russell saying that there could be rain, or there is a bit of rain at turn 5, which is the slow left-hander, which then drops you rapidly downhill as you approach the turn 6 kink that brings you into 7 and then back uphill again. So we'll see if any other drivers start to complain about that potential of rain. Of course, if it does start chucking it down with rain, all the tyre rules go out the window, Mark.
That's true. If somebody comes in for wet, so it's declared a wet track, then absolutely they no longer have to run 2 different types of tyre. I think most of them probably have by now, but that rule would disappear. I just want to put a big shout out here to Yuki Tsunoda, up in 7th place on the hard tyre at this stage in the race, but right tucked in between Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon, 2 of the major players this weekend in terms of performance, and there's Yuki Tsunoda mixing it with them.
Yeah, really impressive once again from Yuki Tsunoda, who was a bit hard on himself after qualifying, saying he made a mistake, he owned up to it, and at the moment doing everything he can to put that AlphaTauri up into the points, and was looking good in Monaco last time around as well, until a brake issue saw him tumble down the order and eventually outside of the points. But Tsunoda continues his good form for AlphaTauri. It's lap 30 of 66. Max Verstappen leads Lewis Hamilton by over 12.5 seconds. So a good time to get another update then. Rugby League, Dave Woods.
Yeah, that try was awarded to Huddersfield 6, St Helens 4. Conrad Harrell, the scorer. Tommy Meckinson has missed the conversion. So 12 minutes played. Huddersfield 6, St Helens 4.
Thanks, Dave. Carlos Sainz is third in his Ferrari in front of George Russell in the top 4, who has the fastest lap. Lance Stroll is on the soft tyre for the Aston Martin, so both Aston Martins are on the soft tyre, along with Leclerc, who have decided that's the tyre they wanted to change onto. So have they done that, Mark, to go as fast as they can in this middle sector and then try and make it up towards the end?
Well, the theory behind starting on the soft tyre is you get a great launch off the line. It's a sticky tyre, it's soft, gives you that launch performance. So that's your best opportunity for making up positions. Because the field is quite tight, this is a faster lap time now with the changes to the final part of the final 2 corners. Slower lap time means the field is less spread. So being on the soft tyre and using the performance of that tyre up against others around you that are on the medium or the hard should, in theory, give you the chance to be a bit racy and start making up positions. The problem for Alonso is he hasn't managed to do that yet. He's still stuck down in 8th place. Lance Stroll up in 5th, a reasonable showing, but he's not looking like he's threatening George Russell ahead of him. He's got no major immediate threat from Esteban Ocon behind, so both Aston Martins kind of stuck in no man's land, and they're going to have to go on to an alternate tyre, probably the medium, for the last part of the race, unless, of course, we get rain.
Big caveat that. It's kind of died down a little bit in the last few laps or so, but those clouds, there are ominous grey clouds that surround this circuit here with just little breaks of blue sky interspersed amongst the track. Meanwhile, though, it is still dry, and this is the sound of Sergio Perez, who has been hunting down Fernando Alonso for 8th spot, and on the main straight with DRS, he makes the move before they even get into the braking zone. So Perez is up into 8th, Alonso into 9th. Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo also having a better run of late. He's currently occupying that final points paying position.
Yeah, so I guess big winners as it stands right now. The guys looking good are the 2 Mercedes. They're the big surprise in a positive sense, I would say. Ferrari, not so good. Sainz dropped back to 3rd from that 2nd place on the grid and not really looking like any threat to the Mercedes of Hamilton. Possibly even going to come under threat of George Russell at some point, as George Russell bangs in another fastest lap on his medium tyres. And of course the sister Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, woefully struggling down in P13 after starting this race in the pit lane, and a slightly curious strategy, starting on the hard tyre, thinking he was going to go long, and actually just joining everybody else around the same time for his first pit stop and going on to the soft. So Mercedes looking good, Ferrari not so much.
Here's George Russell.
Is anyone else report in the rain? I think it's sweat from the inside of my helmet.
So it sounds like it's just you that's reporting the rain. I suspect it might be the sweat.
That's brilliant.
Thanks, George. We got all excited for a bit of rain, and it turns out it's just a bit of sweat. But that doesn't take away the ominous, foreboding grey clouds that are ahead. But perhaps we were a bit premature in thinking there was rain down at Turn 5. But I blame Russell for that.
I don't think I've ever heard a driver confuse sweat for rain before inside a helmet. That's brilliant. Oh, what a shame. I mean, that was really going to spice things up, wasn't it? But nonetheless, George Russell doing well, sweaty or otherwise. Fastest lap of the race, sitting in P4, and gradually, just gradually, trying to reel in Carlos Sainz. If he can get past the Ferrari of Sainz, and that seems like a very realistic possibility, he's on a much fresher set of tyres than the Ferrari ahead of him, that would put both Mercedes in a potential podium position, which is unbelievable.
It would be unbelievable. This is really turning into a race of strategy, and a race particularly around the tyres, which is making it interesting. And it's worth noting, though, that last year we had the hard tyre here, but nobody really wanted to use it. It didn't feel like it fitted the track. This year, Pirelli have reworked that C1 hard tyres, new for 2023, and it seems, at least from what we're looking at, that has worked out well.
Yeah, well, the hard tyre, in theory, should work, you know, for these longer stints. The medium tyre, particularly given the changes we've had, meaning that high-energy last part of the lap takes a bit more of your tyre life away on every single lap, you'd start to think that you would switch more towards the hard tyre, which is why I was a little bit surprised that a lot of people went medium for that middle stint of the Grand Prix. People like Max Verstappen making that work beautifully well, but I guess his car's so good he could almost do anything and still come out on top. Sergio Perez, one more place further up, he finds himself up into P7. It's a slow progression forward, a slower than I expected progression forward for Sergio Perez, but he is making his way up towards, well, he's in the top 7 now. Can he get towards a podium position at the halfway stage as we are at this point?
Yeah, he has just displaced Yuki Tsunoda. Next up for Sergio Perez will be Esteban Ocon. It's lap 33 of 66 then. We're about halfway through this race. Max Verstappen leads by just over 13.5 seconds from Sainz, Russell, Stroll, the top 5. Ocon, Perez, Tsunoda, Alonso, Zhou Guanyu, the top 10. We're covering the Grand Prix live on BBC Radio 5 Live. Let's bring in the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson.
Well, Max Verstappen is obviously cruising to an easy victory here. He can choose whatever strategy he wants pretty much to win this race.
Curse, if ever I've heard one.
As long as nothing goes wrong. On the other hand, Carlos Sainz is under massive pressure from George Russell at the moment. Russell's closing in at more than half a second a lap, sometimes as much as a second a lap. We're looking at the pictures on pit straight. Russell's homing in. Looks like he might even be within striking distance at the end of this coming lap, which is they're just going into lap 34. So it's going to be a Mercedes 2-3 before too long, I think. Just on the Mercedes upgrades, obviously, in one way, this is a good track to judge upgrades, but Mercedes did say in Monaco last weekend, don't get carried away if we're quick in Barcelona, because we were quick in Barcelona last year too, if you remember. It's just a track that suits our car. It'll take a few more races to really get a judge on whether these upgrades are good. Meanwhile, earlier I mentioned that I thought Fernando Alonso, I couldn't make my mind up whether he was struggling for pace or playing a canny game. Looks to me like he's struggling for pace at the moment. He's not making any inroads on Yuki Tsunoda's AlphaTauri. He's down in 9th place. And I wonder if that's a residue of the off he had in qualifying yesterday. They should have been able to repair the car, but maybe something's been missed. And I have the same thoughts about Charles Leclerc. He's having a terrible day. I did think it was a slightly odd choice to just swap out one back end for another back end when you don't know what's wrong with the car in the first place. And I guess they did it for Leclerc's confidence, is what Jock Clear, the senior engineer at Ferrari, said. He can go into the race with confidence, knowing that we've changed out the back end. But it doesn't look like he's got much confidence at the moment, struggling down in 13th place. That's sandwiched between Pierre Gasly and Nick de Vries. So I think there's going to be a bit of a post-mortem at Ferrari. Here's Russell passing Sainz, Harry.
Oh, the sound of George Russell down the inside of the Ferrari. The Spanish racer has to concede the place, but there was oh so nearly contact. Sainz just starting to tread over slightly into the inside lane where George Russell was, but they both make it cleanly through the corner. But the writing, as Andrew was indicating, was on the wall there for Carlos Sainz, with Russell on much younger tyres too, and that Mercedes seemingly proving very pacey around this Barcelona track. It is now a Mercedes 2-3 on the podium. Hamilton leads Russell, Sainz is in fourth. Sergio Perez got through on Ocon while we were talking, so he is now up into the top 5. Ocon, Alonso, Zhou Guanyu is now 8th in front of Piastri and Gasly, because we've had pit stops for Yuki Tsunoda, and I think Lance Stroll just came out of the pits as well in the Aston Martin.
So Lance Stroll going onto the hard tyre, which will now see him, I'm sure, to the end of that Grand Prix. So that should, in theory, be his last pit stop, and actually puts him in a pretty decent position. I mean, he's down in P13 right now, but everybody ahead of him will have to stop again. So actually, that the Aston Martin in the hands of Stroll, not doing a bad job today. I guess the big battle that we were all looking forward to today was really the battle between two titans of this sport, Mercedes versus Ferrari. Closely matched in terms of their overall performance over the last few years, battling out for titles, both bringing major upgrades over the last couple of weeks. But it's very clearly Mercedes on this particular track, at least in these conditions, coming out on top. Two Mercedes inside the top 3, the Ferrari dropping backwards.
Yep, but it's still Max Verstappen who has the edge on everybody.
Solid work.
Just solid.
It was pretty good.
It was pretty good, but unfortunately he's still got to recover from that, is it sweat or rain remark. So he's still got a bit to do for us in the commentary box, at least. For George Russell over the radio, it was a nice move. It gets him up to 3rd place. Verstappen, as I was saying, does now have a 14-second lead over Hamilton and Russell, but it's Sainz and Perez at the top 5. One of the Alpines has just come out of the pit lane. It's Esteban Ocon, who has changed tyres. That puts him further down the field. He's gone onto the hards. His Sainz, meanwhile.
Find the best way to beat Checo.
Understood?
Well, short and concise there from Carlos Sainz. Find the best way to beat Checo. Well, while Ferrari figure that out, we could head to back to the rugby and Dave Woods.
St Helens have taken the lead, 10 points to 6 against Huddersfield. Mark Percival finishing off a slick handling move for St Helens. Their first real attack since their last try, Conrad Hurrell. But St Helens lead 10-6 against Huddersfield with 19 minutes of the first half remaining.
Thanks, Dave. Lap 37 here for the Spanish Grand Prix of 66. Verstappen leads Hamilton, Russell, Sainz, Perez, Alonso, Zhou Guanyu, Oscar Piastri, Pierre Gasly and Charles Leclerc rounds out the top 10 minutes. De Vries, Stroll, Tsunoda, Ocon, Hulkenberg the top 15, Bottas, Albon, Magnussen, Sargent and Norris the top 20. But we are about to we are experiencing the order chopping and changing, because more pit stops are happening at the moment. Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo has been running well this weekend, up into the points for most of this Grand Prix so far. He comes into the pits. That's the screeching you can hear of the Alfa Romeo making its way back into the fast lane and out onto the track. 3.7 second stop, bit slow.
That was an interesting question, wasn't it, from Carlos Sainz, clearly looking in his mirrors, seeing Sergio Perez in the Red Bull closing in. Sergio Perez, of course, started way back outside the top 10, or in P10, I think, after the penalties. But Sergio Perez winding his way through the field, having just made one stop. Now on the hard tyre, potentially able to get to the end of this Grand Prix. He's closing in on Carlos Sainz on the medium tyre, having made his stop. Sainz can make another stop, but he's asking the question, what can I do to beat Perez? He's looking backwards, he's not looking forwards at the Mercedes. He's not thinking, how can I beat Russell, how can I beat Hamilton, how can I protect this fourth place against Sergio Perez? And I think, Carlos Sainz, the only way to answer that is get yourself in a Red Bull, mate, because that car is coming at you fast, and from the performance I've seen so far today from Ferrari, I don't think they've got anything to match it.
No, 6.4 seconds is the gap between Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez. Let's try and bring you up to speed with a little bit of what's happened so far. From pole position, Max Verstappen has led this race and every single lap of it. He started on the medium compound of tyre and has already has made one stop onto the hards. Here's Bottas.
Okay, Albon, Magnussen behind. Yep, slow it down. Thank you.
And that's Bottas with a nice bit of teamwork going on at Alfa Romeo. He's let his teammate Zhou Guanyu through, who is fighting for points right now. Albon and Magnussen fast approaching the back of Bottas. His job, a bit of a sacrificial lamb there, to hold them up and let Zhou Guanyu escape up the road as quick as he can. But Magnussen is trying and having a little look down the inside of Bottas as they head into turn 1. That's over 15th, 16th, 17th position. But once the pit stops play out, imagine Zhou Guanyu will shuffle up the order slightly. Lando Norris, if you're wondering where he is in the McLaren, he's down in 18th. That's because he came in on at the end of lap 1 for a front wing change after damage sustained with the contact with Lewis Hamilton going into turn 1. That has put him out of play really for this race. Charles Leclerc started from the pit lane after a very, very poor qualifying. They've changed the rear end of that car. He's currently in 9th. Should have to make another stop though. He's on the soft tyre at the moment. And the likes of Sergio Perez, who also started outside the top 10, as we were discussing, he is rapidly closing in on Carlos Sainz for 4th at the moment. About 5 seconds between them now, but it's Verstappen with a 15.5 second lead from Hamilton, Russell, Sainz, Perez, the top 5.
Got a feel for Bottas, haven't you? It's reminiscent of his Mercedes days. He's being asked to play the team game and hold up people behind while his teammate disappears up the road. So that's a difficult one for him to play at this stage in his career. But yeah, up front, Perez now closing in rapidly. So he's on a hard tyre. Carlos Sainz on a medium tyre, in theory faster. Yes, he's done a few more laps on it, but that hard tyre of Perez working really well on the Red Bull, and he's got a faster car, we know that, but he's closing in rapidly. That question that came from Carlos, what can we do to beat Sergio? If they're going to do something, they've got to do it pretty quickly, and that the only thing I can think they can do is roll the dice and go on to a soft tyre. There's 26 laps to go. George Russell did 26 laps on a soft tyre, but by the end of that stint, he'd lost so much performance that I think he's going to run out of tyres. So he's got to try and hold up Sergio for a length of time, and then, and I'm really clutching at straws on his behalf here, throw a soft tyre on and try and do something to claw it back at the end of the race. But I think the reality is Sergio Perez is faster in a faster car, and he's going to finish ahead of him.
While we were chatting there, you just heard the sound of Esteban Ocon getting up into 11th in the Alpine, through on Yuki Tsunoda behind him. We've got some pit lane action though. Oscar Piastri comes into the pits, as does Pierre Gasly. So a McLaren and an Alpine both in. That promotes Leclerc, Stroll and Ocon up into the points along with Tsunoda. So Piastri and Gasly fall down the field, but they have switched on to some new rubber, and for Oscar Piastri it is looking like the medium compound of tyre for the Aussie and the hard compound of tyre for the Frenchman in Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, the medium tyre would feel at least like a good tyre to go on to this at this stage. 26 laps to go, there's plenty of life left in it, and in theory a bit more performance. The cars, of course, are getting a little bit lighter now as the fuel burns away. That means it's less aggressive on its tyres, and it should now get you to the end, still with reasonable performance still in the tank, as Valtteri Bottas comes in after trying his best to hold up the cars behind, and he's gone onto the hard tyre, hasn't he?
He has indeed, and he's now 20th and last as the man who took his Mercedes seat, George Russell, swoops by him into turn 1, but that was Bottas being lapped. Russell up in 3rd, still occupying that position with the fastest lap as well. The clouds are still looking quite grey. Is it clutching at straws? I don't know, but they are still looking very grey. And the wind direction here can change quite quickly in Barcelona. So suddenly, or you could have some heavy grey clouds over the circuit, bringing out a bit of rain, maybe.
I love what you're trying to do there.
Yeah.
The bigger question is, how sweaty is George Russell? Confusing sweat on the inside of his visor for rain earlier in this Grand Prix. So much of our
never trust a George
amusement.
Russell weather prediction or weather report.
Can we just spare a moment to talk about Max Verstappen? We've hardly talked about him all race, but he's 15.5 seconds out in front of this Grand Prix at the moment, ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Nobody can match him, and I do feel like he gets quite a lot of grief recently about just how quick and dominant they are in this sport. Let's just take our hats off for a moment to that team and that driver, because they are doing an unbelievable job. Not only creating an amazing car, they've got a brilliant driver who rarely puts a foot wrong, but operationally they're also pretty exceptional. I mean, they have, with the advantage that a great car brings, of course, you get a few more options, but they barely put a foot wrong, and that's why they're so far ahead in this championship.
No, completely. And 15.8 seconds the gap to Hamilton then, Verstappen is. This is the sound of Carlos Sainz screeching away from the pit lane after another pit stop. He came in on the mediums, and did you see what tyre he was going to go out on?
Yeah, he went onto the hard tyre, which is a curious one, because that doesn't give you performance, it gives you longevity, which we don't need in quite the same degree at this point in the race, with 42 laps out of 66 gone. It drops him now back behind Alonso. Alonso will have to stop again, so what's going to happen when this all shakes out is Sainz is going to end up behind Perez. And yes, there is a tyre offset in terms of tyre life, but they're both on the hard tyre, and Perez, we know, has a faster car. I don't think that is the answer to getting past Sergio Perez by the checkered flag.
No, Charles Leclerc comes into the pits and is quickly back out again, and he's just about to feed in front of Nick De Vries and Kevin Magnussen, who are furiously battling over 15th and 16th down into turn one. De Vries getting the better of Magnussen on that occasion, but if Leclerc is not careful here, they might get him too, because he's going to be on much colder tyres. But Charles Leclerc is able to stay in front for the time being, but he has tumbled down the order. 14th he holds the hard tyre. So it's really been a bit of nothing from Ferrari and Leclerc, I hate to say it, from the pit lane, and we're lap 43 of 66, and he's only 14th. There's not much more to say, is there?
It's just really disappointing, and you know, Ferrari got to ask, I mean, if they haven't already, they've got to start asking big questions. Here's Verstappen.
Hey Max, thoughts on this tyre?
Oh, not amazing. Let's see a few more laps. I struggle a lot with like under braking. The front is overheating.
So there you go, something going on inside the cockpit of Verstappen's car. We thought he was just driving around in absolute silence with nothing much to think about, but he has got his own challenges going on. He's got such a gap now, though, nearly 16 seconds, that give it a few more laps and he'll actually have a completely free pit stop and be able to come out in front if he wants to. I can very much see him throwing a soft tyre on towards the end and going for that all-important, I mean, is it all-important, fastest lap point? But you know how much he likes it, so I can see that happening, just if nothing else, to get rid of the hard tyre. But interesting that he doesn't like the hard tyre. His teammate Sergio Perez is also on that same tyre, having just made the same strategy, one stop at this point. And we talk about that battle between Perez and Sainz, now on the same tyre, that much younger tyre with Sainz. If it's not a particularly good tyre, if it's not working very well, come the end of the race, are we going to see a few people struggling?
Quite possibly. Well, it's lap 44 of 66, and it is indeed Verstappen who leads. 16 seconds now, the gap between himself and Lewis Hamilton in second, and George Russell is third. Perez, Alonso the top 5, Sainz, Stroll, Ocon, Tsunoda, and Zhou Guanyu the top 10. Hulkenberg, Piastri, Gasly, Leclerc, De Vries the top 15. Norris, Albon, Sargent, Magnussen, and Bottas 20th and last. And actually, I do just think he deserves a little bit of a shout out. Zhou Guanyu has had one of his better races, it must be said. He's been doing some brilliant overtakes. He's looked very quick in that Alfa Romeo, all through qualifying. At one point, it really looked like he might get through into Q3. And when we have a field spread that is as tight as it is in 2023, when you exclude Red Bull, it's been, I think, a fairly impressive showing from the Chinese racer. Yeah, agreed. I think him and Yuki Tsunoda both doing very well for their respective teams right now, in 9th and 10th respectively. But yeah, you're right. It's Zhou Guanyu, the lead driver of that team this weekend, unquestionably. Yeah, well, he's looking for his second points finish of the season. Managed to finish 9th back in Australia, hoping for more. It's not been too good a run for Alfa Romeo either, with Valtteri Bottas's only points score at the moment, courtesy of an 8th place position way back in Bahrain in round 1. Let's see if Zhou Guanyu can hang on to a point or so over the next 20 or so laps that we have remaining of this race. But Mercedes will be well and truly buoyed by this, even though they might say it's track specific. A double podium is still a double podium if they can hang on to it, with Hamilton in 2nd and Russell in 3rd, as Fernando Alonso pits from 5th. That should allow Carlos Sainz back through, and indeed it does so. Sainz comes in and he gets rid of his soft tyres, and on go. I think that's the hard rubber for the Spaniard.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he went so long, Fernando Alonso, on that middle stint on the soft tyre. It feels like he must have been losing performance. I haven't been monitoring his specific lap times that closely, but it feels like it was a long stint on the soft tyre in the middle part of the race, when he could have probably stopped a little bit earlier. He's on the hard tyre now, so that'll get him all the way to the end with plenty of life left in the tyre. We've got, what, 20 laps to go. This is now shaping up to be a bit of a sprint finish towards the end. The only strategy left, I guess, is that of the front runners. George Russell now being called into the pits for a pit stop to go onto the soft tyre.
Yeah, from 3rd position, Russell comes into the pits, puts the pit lane limiter down through the gears and slides into the Mercedes pit box, and the crew get to work. The front and rear jack lifts him up. The engineers, like lightning, 2.6 seconds change the tyres, and he's back out into the fast lane, heading towards the pit exit on the soft compound tyre.
I can't help thinking George Russell was sort of caught in between decisions in that middle part of the race, when he could have maybe eked out that first stint on did so well on the soft tyre, could have gone to the hard tyre and maybe got to the end of the Grand Prix, a little bit like Verstappen has done with his hard tyre, but he didn't. He went onto the medium tyre, which means he's now had to stop again.
Okay, Max, that's your 2nd warning for track limits. First one was turn 9, this one was turn 5.
What?
Track limits, 2 warnings.
And he only gets, Mark, 1 more.
Yeah, and then it'll be a black flag, won't it? So he's got to keep an eye on things. I mean, he's probably getting bored and just sort of wandering out on trying out his own lines, but he does need to keep an eye on that. Yeah, George Russell, he's now under threat from Sergio Perez. So he's had the medium tyre, it's forced him into a stop. That's going to allow Sergio Perez to go through as all of this shakes out. Even though George Russell is now onto the medium tyre, in fact he's actually stayed ahead of Perez, hasn't he? But he's on the soft tyre, which will give him performance to the end. How is Sergio Perez going to shape up with that well-worn hard tyre? It's a very, very long stint on the hard tyre. No, he did get through, sorry, Perez did get through. So that's really the battle now. Can George Russell use the performance of that soft tyre that is quicker, with only 19 laps to go? Can he use that to effect an overtake, catch and overtake Sergio Perez to keep that podium place?
There certainly will be a sprint to the finish then for George Russell, if he can try and get that podium position back from Sergio Perez. This is the sound of Lewis Hamilton in his Mercedes, currently 16 seconds back from the leader Max Verstappen, but I think Lewis would take a P2 finish come the end of this race, considering the form he has shown in that Mercedes this year. It's not been where he is used to being at the front of the field, but saying that, he will always get the most out of any car he's in, and Lewis Hamilton certainly showing why he is a 7-time world champion and able to get the absolute most out of everything he's given in that Mercedes car. Perez just behind him, Russell 4th, Sainz is in 5th. As the clouds do get a little bit darker, that's the last time I'm going to say it, I promise. I just wanted to pick up on something a little bit further down the field too. The 2 Hasses, both going for 3 stoppers, but they've had, I think, 2 consecutive rear jack failures coming into the pits. On Nico Hulkenberg's car, we just saw a little replay of the rear jack man going in and not being able to get up, and so they have the backup then, don't they, Mark, ready to go?
Yeah, and actually, although it's not great that happened, the backup plan works incredibly well, and they practice that over and over again, so it is seamless. When something goes wrong, there's no floundering, there's no flapping and working out what to do next. They already have a very well-rehearsed plan B, and they executed that very well.
Fernando Alonso is on the prowl in his Aston Martin, and he is caught right up to the back of Zhou Guanyu as they speed through the double right-hander that now ends this lap. They've gotten rid of the old slow chicane that, let's be honest, absolutely nobody liked, and now carrying so much more speed across the line down the main straight. Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin with his DRS open. The green car goes past the slightly dulled red car of the Alfa Romeo into turn 1. Zhou Guanyu losing out of position there, down into 10th. 10th. He's got to be careful because Pierre Gasly is also coming up behind him at a rate of knots. There's a bit more of a gap there, though, about just under 5 seconds. Gasly's just got through on Piastri. So Alonso in 9th, Zhou Guanyu into 10th, and that is the last points-paying position currently.
Yeah, so two drivers that I'm keeping a close eye on are Sergio Perez and Lewis Hamilton. Very similar lap times at the moment. Perez on that well-worn hard tyre, Hamilton on a reasonably well-worn medium tyre. So the question is, does Hamilton need to stop again? And I suspect he probably does. If that happens, he's going to promote Sergio Perez straight up into P2, opening up the possibility of a Red Bull 1-2.
Yuki, do you need stability or rotation?
Just take the drive. I cannot go for faster than this. No limitation.
So that's Yuki Tsunoda then, who is coming under pressure from Fernando Alonso over P8 right now. He's looking for more drive, while the team are asking him if he wants 2 other different things. Lap 49 of 66, Verstappen leads, Hamilton, Perez, Russell, Sainz, Stroll, Ocon, Tsunoda, Alonso, Zhou Guanyu. This is live coverage of the Spanish Grand Prix with myself, Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is the former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley, as that is the sound of Fernando Alonso, who does get through on Yuki Tsunoda, heading down into turn 1. And we're also joined by the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson.
Yeah, so I think Yuki Tsunoda was obviously getting a bit tense there because he saw Fernando Alonso homing in on him in his mirrors, and he's just blasted past on the straight. Now, Mark was saying keep an eye on Lewis Hamilton. I think keep an eye on Fernando Alonso as well, because he's got a big tyre offset against 2 of the drivers in front of him. He's only 3 seconds behind Esteban Ocon in the Alpine, but he's got 10-lap fresher tyres. And Lance Stroll, his Aston Martin teammate, is he's a fair bit ahead of Ocon there. He's only another 3 seconds ahead of Ocon, and he's also.
Catch him at this rate, but I can turn it up, but you need to tell me when.
Yeah, we will catch him very quickly at this rate.
So that's Russell catching Perez on his fresh tyres. We've got Alonso homing in on Ocon, I think, to possibly pass him next on the straight in just a second. And then he's got his teammate Lance Stroll just 3 seconds ahead of him, so keep an eye on him too.
Well, we're getting into the closing stages of this Spanish Grand Prix. We've also got coverage of the French Open 4th round. Novak Djokovic playing over on 5 Sports Extra. But right here on BBC Radio 5 Live, we are on lap 50 of 66 for the Spanish Grand Prix. It's Max Verstappen who leads from Lewis Hamilton and Sergio Perez, the top 3, Mark.
And I think we've just got the answer to that question about Hamilton versus Perez. Perez dropping away. So Perez losing lap time now, and his team considering a stop. Hamilton now having to protect against that undercut perhaps, and making a stop themselves. So Hamilton on his way in, he can take whatever he wants now. He's only got 15 laps to get to the end of this Grand Prix. Whatever his preferred tyre is, he can take it. Sergio Perez, I suspect, will cover him off.
Here's Lewis Hamilton then. The sound you're hearing is the 7-time champion screeching out of the pit lane. He goes back onto the soft rubber. Sergio Perez also coming in the Red Bull here. So Hamilton into the pits, followed a few seconds later by the Red Bull. Hamilton should come out and maintain that second spot as George Russell, his teammate, comes steaming down the main straight. Russell will certainly get through on Sergio Perez, and he does so. So the order: Hamilton out in second, Russell third. Perez will come out here on the pit lane entry, and he can't. Sainz swoops by him down the main straight, so the Ferrari is up into 4th.
It's just like these hard tires have no grip. Just sliding everywhere.
Understood.
Well, he's got nearly a 40-second gap, so if Max Verstappen wants to come into the pits, he can absolutely do that with a suspected 22-second lost time, and nearly contact between Fernando Alonso and the Aston Martin and the Alpine of Esteban Ocon going down the main straight. Alonso trying to get through on the Alpine. Ocon changing positions very late in the day. They cut across the pit lane exit, and they both live to fight another day. Alonso skates through up into 7th. Ocon has to fall down into 8th, but that was mightily close.
Let's not forget there was some bad blood between those two when they were teammates at Alpine last year. Alonso got very upset about Esteban Ocon's, as he saw it, overzealous defence on a number of occasions when they were teammates. He will not have been impressed by that, I don't think.
Do you know what? This race is coming alive, because the best races are when you get a mixture of strategies that all tend to converge in the dying moments of a Grand Prix, and that's exactly what we've got here. We've got the Red Bull of Sergio Perez versus the Mercedes of George Russell, both on brand new soft tyres. A lead for Russell, of course, but a much faster car in the hands of Sergio Perez. We've got Carlos Sainz just in amongst that battle on with a Ferrari that's been floundering to some extent, and we've got a Fernando Alonso Alonso, who's charging through the field, having the time of his life.
Here we go then. We're going to have a sprint to the finish from multiple positions here. You can hear the cheering in the background as Alonso got through on Ocon and Sainz got through on Perez, courtesy of Perez coming out of the pit lane. Just going back to that overtake, Andrew, between Ocon and Perez, do you think, Ocon and Alonso, do you think there might be a penalty coming Ocon's way for that?
No, I think it was probably just about okay, but I don't think Alonso will be impressed as Verstappen comes in for a sort of security pit stop to get off those hard tyres he doesn't like. Just on the Aston Martin Alonso situation, we're now heading into a really interesting position because it's his teammate Lance Stroll and Alonso coming up behind him with a lot more pace, but there's no one else that Alonso can really chase down because the guy ahead of Stroll is Perez in a Red Bull, who Alonso's not going to get. Now, Lance Stroll is the son of Lawrence Stroll, who owns the team. Is Lawrence really going to want Alonso to pass his son?
Come on,
what's going to happen?
Can he
well,
stop
let's see.
It's a long straight down to turn one. I think there's no way that Lance Stroll is going to be able to keep Fernando behind him, team orders or otherwise. To introduce team orders, I think, would be actually really quite controversial at this point.
Well, it's the first test of harmony, potentially. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Potentially. I wonder if the Spanish racer on home soil will even care what is said to him over the radio. We wait to find out. The writing on the wall, I'm afraid to say it, for Carlos Sainz has been and gone as Sergio Perez in the Red Bull, under DRS with a bit of tow down into turn one, has made his way past Sainz in the Ferrari. The Red Bull gets up into fourth spot. Perez also has the fastest lap at the moment. He'll get the extra bonus point for that if he can hold on to it till the end of the race. But his teammate Max Verstappen might well nick it off him, having just come in for a fresh set of soft tyres. We have plenty of gap to do so. As Andrew mentioned, it was a bit of a security stop anyway, just to get rid of his previous set of tyres. And this is the sound of Perez swooping down the inside of Sainz and up into fourth position. It's Verstappen who leads Hamilton, Russell the top three, Sainz, Perez, Sainz, apologies, Stroll the top six, Alonso, Ocon, Tsunoda and Zhou Guanyu the top 10 and last of the point scorers.
So 8.5 seconds then, Sergio Perez has got to close down George Russell. They both came in on the same lap for fresh, in fact they weren't brand new tyres. In fact, Sergio Perez may have had a fresh set of brand new tyres. Verstappen I know didn't, but both soft tyres on the Red Bull and on the Mercedes. Same tyre life on both. It's a straight run to the finish and there are 8 seconds between them. But I think Sergio Perez, already with the fastest lap on those tyres now, going to start to hunt him down very quickly. Can he disrupt that Mercedes podium?
Further back, Lando Norris in the McLaren, who started third. You may be wondering what happened to him. He had a bit of contact with Lewis Hamilton into turn one on lap one, had to come in for a front wing change, and that really put an end to his race. He's down in 19th at the moment. Logan Sargent started from the pit lane. He's the only guy ahead of him in 18th. Then Charles Leclerc, also a starter from the pit lane. Ferrari having changed the rear end of that car after a disaster qualifying. Leclerc only up into 12th spot. It has not been a good weekend for the Monegasque racer, while his teammate is up in the top 5. And as we mentioned, Sergio Perez started in 11th and is up into 4th. Can he disrupt that Mercedes podium and make amends for 2 poor qualifyings on the trot? Firstly in Monaco and secondly here in Barcelona. Well, it's lap 55 of 66, so just about 10 or so laps to go. He's running out of time to do it. The gap between them is 7.5 seconds.
Yeah, chasing him down. But just thinking back to the very first lap, the opening corners of this race, that coming together between Hamilton and Lando Norris, and just look at the 2 fortunes of both of those drivers. Hamilton got away with that, so close to it being a puncher where the 2 cars made contact. Hamilton now in second place. Lando Norris, who did get the damage to his front wing, second last. So 2 very different tales from that same little incident on the opening few corners.
This is the sound of Yuki Tsunoda in the AlphaTauri, who has impressed many people in the paddock this year by how well he has, trounced his teammate Nick de Vries, but also ringed the neck of that AlphaTauri. He looks like he is not done with his overtakes yet. He's trying to catch Esteban Ocon in front of him. The gap's about a second, but he also has to look in his mirrors because Zhou Guanyu fancies a couple more points here and is looking at Yuki Tsunoda's 9th place finish. Let's bear in mind that Yuki Tsunoda will be sick and tired of either finishing 10th or 11th this season. He's done it for the majority, bar the last race where he came home in 15th spot. He'll be desperately hoping he can hold on to 9th or maybe even double his points haul and get 4th place too. But with 10 laps or so, he's actually falling a bit behind Ocon now, and Zhou Guanyu 7 tenths and closing.
Yeah, so Hamilton 16 seconds behind Verstappen. I don't think there's any hope of Hamilton catching Verstappen or anybody at this rate, so that's fine. But can he hang on to second place? I think he probably can, but behind him, George Russell just dropping back a tiny bit by about half a second a lap from his teammate Hamilton. Behind him, though, Sergio Perez closing at just under half a second a lap on George Russell. That's 7 seconds he's got to make up. He's got 10 laps in which to do it. I'm pretty sure he's going to be able to do that. I think the question of getting Hamilton, I think, is probably a bit of a stretch too far for Sergio Perez. And you've got to say, with a Red Bull that's as good as we see it is in the hands of Verstappen, anything other than second place for the sister Red Bull got to be seen as not a great result, is it?
Further back down the field, it is Yuki Tsunoda and Zhou Guanyu who still go toe-to-toe as Yuki Tsunoda breaks into turn one. Side by side, there's a plume of dust that comes from his brakes. Zhou Guanyu is edged out and has to take to the runoff, and now there is a new layout in that runoff there at turn one where they have to follow the little escape road and go behind the bollard. I didn't see if Zhou Guanyu did that, but he didn't gain any kind of advantage. He stays where he is. We're riding on board with Zhou Guanyu now. That's the sound you can hear on the Alfa Romeo. He's being forced the outside. Tsunoda quite rough there.
He pushed me off, man.
I mean, he did kind of push him off there. Zhou Guanyu did go around the bollard, so that should all be fine. But Tsunoda was quite aggressive with that defensive there, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's a high-speed turn one, isn't it? The right-hander of turn one. You just come down off a heavy braking zone from a very fast straight, and then it's reasonably high speed going through there, and you're right on the limit. And the tiniest twitch from the car on the inside can really freak out the car on the outside, and that's exactly what happened. Having to respond, and of course that took him way off into the runoff area.
I wonder if Tsunoda has got problems with his brakes again as well, because under braking you can just see a little bit of black dust that's being spewed out, and he had brake problems in Monaco as well, which forced him to tumble down the field. We can see if he has that same issue coming into turn one again. He's not having to be as defensive this time because Zhou Guanyu was backed off on that last lap. But while they've been fighting, Tsunoda has now fallen to nearly 2 seconds behind Esteban Ocon, so Ocon has kind of gotten away with it up in 8th. It's Verstappen leads, 17.5 seconds to Hamilton, then it's Russell, the top 3. Perez is 4th, Sainz is 5th, then it's Stroll, Alonso, Ocon is in 8th, then comes Tsunoda and Zhou Guanyu in the top 10. Gasly is 11th in front of Leclerc. Piastri and De Vries embroiled in a nice little fight that's developing in the closing stages over 13th and 14th. Nico Hülkenberg rounds out the top 15. Albon, Magnussen, Norris, Sargent, Bottas the top 20, and that means, Mark Priestley, that we have had no retirements once again in a Grand Prix in 2023.
No, mate, there's still a few laps to go. Anything can happen, you know that. I was with Mika Hakkinen here back in, when was it, 2000?
That's a nice name drop.
Leading the race by many, many seconds when we had a catastrophic failure on the car and he ended up not finishing. So, and that was on the last lap of the Grand Prix. So anything can happen, even with, 7, 8 laps to go?
Well, Verstappen is cruising, it has to be said, to yet another win. It would be his 40th career win, which is mightily impressive, and he carries on this dominance. Well, he'll get to the 100 mark very quickly, I can imagine. But we're not yet quite done here for the Spanish Grand Prix. But the closest battles at the moment, well, Perez in that 4th place is 5 seconds behind George Russell. He's been incrementally getting that down, but not by enough. This is the sound of Nick De Vries in the AlphaTauri, who has a big snap going into turn 1, nearly loses the rear, has to correct it. He does so indeed, but he's chasing down Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. That's over 13th and 14th.
Yeah, and we're going to get shortly an answer to that question about the 2 Aston Martins, because Fernando Alonso, 1.4 seconds now, just behind his teammate Lance Stroll, nearly edging towards, 1.3 seconds out, edging towards a DRS pass into turn 1 potentially.
Well, also something to think about as well that just flashed up on our timing screens there. Max Verstappen earlier on was warned for his track limits violations. He's done 2 of them. He got a 3rd one by the looks of it and was given a black and white flag. Now that's your final, your last warning that you're allowed, isn't it? Here he is.
Okay, Max, that was a 3rd stroke on track limits.
Where?
Turn 10. You've now been given the black and white flag. You are 18 seconds ahead of Hamilton. No risks required, Max.
almost on cue. It's like they knew we were talking about him. What are the outcomes then if he does have another discretion for track limits? Is it a time penalty?
Yeah, it's a penalty, yeah, absolutely. And there's not even a question over it. Once you've had the black and white flag, that is your final warning. So next time out, it's a slam dunk penalty, 5 seconds. What it does do is kind of, and this will really frustrate Max, because it kind of puts pay to any attempt at a fastest lap. You can't go for that fastest lap point and not risk track limits.
Tell Lance not to worry, I just want to build a gap with the cars behind in case of rain or anything.
Yeah, copy. Understood, mate. Copy.
Copy for that. Zero risk.
Yeah, understood, mate. Understood.
Well, we were wondering what the balance of harmony would be between the two Aston Martins, Stroll in 6th, Alonso in 7th, but doesn't look like we'll have to worry. Alonso is catching Stroll, but just to give him a bit of a buffer to the cars behind.
Isn't it like a... He's like the
Who
best,
is this man?
I know. What sort of PR game is this guy on? I mean, come on. He's like the most lovable character you've ever seen in Formula 1.
He knows who's paying him.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, he's closed right up behind him. I think there's partly building a gap. There's partly just a little show of, look, I'm quick enough to do it if I wanted to. He could easily get into a DRS pass here. He's right underneath the rear wing of his teammate. He says it's to build a gap. Maybe it is.
A reminder that Fernando Alonso's teammate is Lance Stroll, who is the son of Lawrence Stroll, who owns the team, for those who might not be aware, just to give you an indication of the harmonious chatter between the two teammates, who are currently down in 6th and 7th position. Meanwhile, up front and undeterred, it is Max Verstappen.
What's my fastest lap?
Yours is a 17.3. Like I say, you've been given a black and white flag, so we cannot afford anything.
That's his chief engineer, GP, on the radio, who really does not want him to go for anything that might risk any kind of penalty.
I was literally just about to say, you know, Max must be boiling in his crash helmet there, thinking, oh, I really want that fastest lap. But he actually could do it, couldn't he? A 5-second penalty. He's got way more than that in hand. He could just go for it, and if he gets a 5-second penalty, so what?
Yeah, he could do, and it just goes to show how much Verstappen still wants this.
Look at his lap. He is literally going.
He's lighting up the sectors. Right, purple sector 1, purple sector 2. He's absolutely going for it. I wonder if we'll hear a team radio message in a minute from his engineer saying, please slow down. Further back in the back, this is the sound of Lando Norris. A race to forget for him. What could have been for Norris. His teammate Piastri was also in the points for the early part of this race, has fallen outside of it now, and this is Norris battling with Kevin Magnussen down into turn 1, trying around the outside, but Magnussen holding on in front of him.
Fastest lap for Max Verstappen, by the
way.
Look at that, 16.3. He's absolutely blitzed the fastest lap, and I can only imagine his engineers on the pit wall must be pulling their hair out. I mean, he's hopefully done it without a penalty.
All out now, all out.
Now that is Sergio Perez's team radio. He's in 4th spot, still about 5 seconds behind George Russell. He did have the fastest lap, so perhaps they're hoping that Checo might be able to steal it back. He, as I'm aware, doesn't have any track limits violations to his name. Perez currently in 4th. Also, penalty news, though, to bring you while we're on the topic. It's such a shame for Yuki Tsunoda, who has been given a 5-second time penalty. That will drop him outside of the point, so all that hard work, Mark, undone.
Yeah, a real shame, actually. But yeah, I think it's a fair penalty, to be fair. We saw the replay. It did look like it was his fault, but it's such a shame after such a strong performance elsewhere. Up front, you've got to look at Sergio Perez. He's been given the hurry up by his team. He hasn't made enough inroads into George Russell with just 4 laps to go. He's got 5.3 second gap. I can't see him closing down and overtaking him, and that's got to be a disappointment for the Red Bull team. We said at the start of the race, if this was Verstappen starting right at the back of this field, you'd imagine he could still win it.
Now can you bring it home within the white lines? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That is classic team radio there from the Red Bull side on Max Verstappen's garage. He's got the fastest lap now, and with just a few laps remaining, please bring it home without any more penalties. Just under 19 seconds is his gap, though, to Hamilton too. And if he did get one, would it make any difference?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
I mean, he's got it sewn up. But just to finish that point, this is the difference between the two Red Bull cars. Max Verstappen, I think we all have absolute confidence that if he was starting dropping outside the top 10, he's still going to win the race. It's just a question of when he gets to the front. Sergio Perez has just struggled to do that. I know it's not easy. I know you're working your way through traffic and that really affects tyres. But I think that's the difference, even if it's just perception, but I think that's the difference between Verstappen and Sergio Perez in terms of their outright performance.
Around the final corner then for those fighting for the final points paying positions. So Yuki Tsunoda in 9th in his AlphaTauri has a 5-second penalty. That will drop him down, so that will promote Zhou Guanyu, Pierre Gasly and Charles Leclerc into a points paying position. So Leclerc should get 1 point for his efforts, but he is closing at the moment on the back of the Alpine of Pierre Gasly. Gasly had a shocker of a start somewhere because he was up in the top 10, and that was even after a penalty. So again, another what could have been for Pierre Gasly had he not impeded Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen in qualifying. He received 2 3-place grid penalties for that indiscretion, but he was right at the bottom of the timing screens in the opening laps. Charles Leclerc, meanwhile, a disaster of a qualifying for him, could only manage 19th, said there was absolutely something wrong with his car. The Ferrari team changed everything on the rear end of that Ferrari. He started from the pit lane. He hasn't been able to carve his way through the field. He might get a point for his work.
He might do, yeah. He's got to get past Gasly, hasn't he? And then that penalty to Tsunoda would then drop him up into P10 to give him that point. Looks like he may well do that. So, yeah, he could well get a point, which will be very slight consolation from a very disappointing weekend. It's been an interesting enough Spanish Grand Prix, hasn't it? A mix of strategies. We haven't had any major incidents, as you said. No one yet dropping out of this Grand Prix. All 20 runners still on track and fighting for position. So I think there's been enough to say that the circuit changes have been a positive change. I think we've had this mixture of tyre strategies that does bring the race alive at different points in the circuit. I think the Spanish fans will be disappointed not to see one of their 2 Spaniards in a higher position. I think Alonso showed promise, even Sainz with his qualifying position, but both have just had disappointing Grand Prix, to be honest, haven't they?
I agree, completely agree. You said it perfectly there. But this is the sound of Charles Leclerc, who is not giving up just yet. Gets a bit of a twitch on the steering wheel now as he comes into the braking zone of the downhill left-hander of turn 5. That was where George Russell might have indicated there was a bit of rain earlier on in this race, but it turned out it was just sweat from his visor. So that got us all excited for no reason. But as Mark alludes to, there was still enough of this race to be interested about, particularly with the different strategies and cars starting out of position. So half a second then between Gasly and Leclerc over 11th and 12th, and you have to say Leclerc looks like he has the upper hand. Meanwhile, over 3rd and 4th place mark, George Russell in 3rd, Sergio Perez in 4th. He has closed that gap down just under 3 seconds now. Yeah,
he got the hurry up from his team, didn't he? And he has taken a couple of seconds off the gap, which is positive. It's still coming down, but there's only 2 laps to go. Is that going to be enough to get Sergio Perez onto the podium, which is quite frankly the least that he should be achieving in a Red Bull?
Penultimate lap then for Max Verstappen. The final lap, I should say, for Max Verstappen. 21 seconds his gap over Hamilton, Russell, Perez and Sainz, but the day is not quite done yet. Perhaps a point on offer, perhaps purely for pride for Pierre Gasly and Charles Leclerc, currently battling down in 11th and 12th. This really is the closest battle on the track that we have right now in the dying stages of this Spanish Grand Prix, which has been a true test of tyre strategy. We've had no inclement weather to deal with. We've also had cars starting out of position and not being able to carve their way through as easily as possible, but some stars have absolutely shined. Yuki Tsunoda, bar the penalty he's about to receive for a track limits infringement. Zhou Guanyu up there as well. Esteban Ocon proving once again that Alpine have upped their pace slightly. He's in the moment, he's at 8th currently. The 2 Hasses from what looked like good qualifying for Nico Hülkenberg further down the field. The race hasn't panned out that way. Hülkenberg down in 15th, Magnussen down in 18th. They both went for 3 stoppers. Logan Sargent, who started from the pit lane, no improvements for him, sadly. The Williams racer down in 20th. Now, he may be on Spanish home soil, though, but the fans are up in their seats to celebrate Max Verstappen, who comes round the final corner, and at the track where he took his first career win in Formula 1, he takes his 40th win in Formula 1. Max Verstappen wins the Spanish Grand Prix in front of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, who will come home to make it a double Mercedes podium. Sergio Perez was closing in on George Russell to try and break the Merc podium. He couldn't do it in the end. Perez will come across the line in 4th. Carlos Sainz on home soil should come across to finish in the top 5.
Yeah, what a good afternoon's racing. Perfect day for Verstappen, very solid day, very strong day for both Mercedes drivers. Disappointing for Ferrari, disappointing for McLaren, disappointing for Alonso perhaps as well.
Fernando Alonso was right on the back of Lance Stroll, is right on the back of Lance Stroll. Only the top 5 have taken the checker, but he's already waving to the grandstands as he makes his way around turn 12. So clearly he stood by his radio message earlier on that, Lance, don't worry, I'm not going to overtake you. I'm just going to get close enough to prove that I can. But the two Aston Martins come across the line. It's 6th and 7th for their hard work. And a reminder, Alonso had a damaged floor from qualifying. That put him down the order. But nonetheless, I think he seems happy with his race. He's waving straight away to the fans. The 3-time Grammy Award-winning singer Shakira watches on and celebrates. It's 7th place, though, for Alonso that they are celebrating. It is his worst finish of the season, but either way, it's good. Here's the winner.
Well controlled, Max. Another win.
Yeah, good race that. Again, very lovely result this.
Well done, Max. That was mega. Very well controlled. Even though you went over the white lines a few times.
Yeah, just within the limit.
Very well done, very well controlled. Masterclass.
Yeah, really good weekend. So thank you very much to everyone.
5th win of the season for Max Verstappen, just about keeping it within the limit. Nobody, Mark, can stop this man. I think we will look back on these days and go, Max Verstappen is one of the all-time greats.
Max Verstappen and the Red Bull team, I would say, you know, they're executing perfectly. That was a masterclass. It was a masterclass in terms of strategy, although they had plenty of options, they could almost do anything, but they executed perfectly. The driving was fantastic. Here's Hamilton.
Great work, Lewis. What an awesome drive. Fantastic management there, mate. And awesome pace. So there's a P2, P3 for the team. Great result. Good to see you back up there.
Mega job, guys. Mega job. Thank you so much for everyone back at the factory continuing to push. This is the real showing of all your hard work, so thank you. Let's keep pushing. Mega job to George as well. Awesome drive.
Well driven, Lewis. Really well driven. Always under control.
2nd podium of the season for Lewis Hamilton. It'll be the 1st podium for his teammate George Russell. But it's Verstappen who wins then in front of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, making it a double Mercedes podium finish. Sergio Perez recovered to 4th place. Carlos Sainz rounds out the top 5. Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso, Linus Stirling 6th and 7th for Aston Martin. Esteban Ocon came home 8th. Zhou Guanyu gets a couple of points for his hard-earned work in 9th for Alfa Romeo. Pierre Gasly stole the final point. He kept Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari at bay, who leaves Spain with nothing. Yuki Tsunoda was running in that 9th spot, but a 5-second time penalty means he comes home in 12th in front of Oscar Piastri's McLaren. Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri was 14th. Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas 15th in front of Alex Albon. Lando Norris, Kevin Magnussen, Valtteri Bottas and Logan Sargent in the Williams 20th and last in a race that was all about tyre strategy, with all 20 drivers finishing.
Yeah, really solid afternoon. I mean, Mercedes, I think, big winners here. They had a good solid weekend last week and they've done it last year and they've done it absolutely again. So they'll be very happy with what they come away from Barcelona with. Max Verstappen, as you said before, in a league of his own. His teammate still with work to do, I guess.
Well, with that, another win on the board for Verstappen. Perez only managing 4th place. The gap now at the top of the standings is 53 points, which is mega. Coming into this weekend, it was 39 points after a miserable display from Sergio Perez in Monaco. Even with a top 4 finish, it's championship over.
He's got to look over his shoulder, hasn't he, more than looking ahead. I mean, he outscored Alonso, of course, dramatically or significantly enough today, but over the course of the season, is he going to be able to maintain that? I mean, that's the bigger question. He's not going to catch Verstappen, but is he going to get caught by anybody else?
Well, they make their way through Parc Fermé. They've gotten out of the cars, they've celebrated with their teams, and now they make their way over to be checked. Pick the obligatory watches as Max Verstappen's superior Red Bull, which could well win every single race of the season. This was the 7th race of the season. Of course, we've had a couple of cancellations with Imola and China before the season even started. So we have lost a couple, but with an ever-expanding calendar in Formula One, looking at 25 races for next year. it throws the stat book out the window. Max Verstappen trumping everybody, and with that 40th win, he's a one shy of equaling Ayrton Senna in the all-time list of most wins in Formula One. Just to highlight where Verstappen is amongst the history books.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the possibility of Red Bull winning every race, and the closest people to do that were McLaren back in 1988, where they just missed out on one. But back then there were only 16. There were only 16 races. They won 15 of them. Now there's 23, 22 if you take out one. But no, it is 23, isn't it? That's a huge number of races if you're going to go all season without losing one.
Yeah, we started the year with 23, lost a couple, so we're down a couple then. But we'll just await then for the interviews. First up, let's hear from your winner with the 2016 champion, Nico Rosberg.
Max Verstappen, what an incredible performance from you once again today. Is this the most enjoyable time ever for you in your Formula One career?
I mean, it's a big pleasure, you know, to drive with a car like this. And I think, yeah, it showed again today. I mean, we had quite a lot of different tire strategies out there. I think for most of the race we're on the right one, but yeah, again, a win here, it's incredible.
Max, behind us, we just saw that great battle with Carlos Sainz into turn one. Take us through that. Was that really on the edge?
I mean, I had the harder compound, of course. So I knew the start was maybe going to be a bit tricky. And yeah, I mean, going around the outside in turn one is always quite difficult, but luckily nothing happened.
Are you happy to distance your main title rival in Perez?
Well, I mean, we had another strong weekend, and that's, of course, what I like to see from myself, from the team. And hopefully, you know, we can just keep that up throughout the year.
Thank you very much, Max. Crowd is really cheering for you there. That's nice to see here in Spain. That seemed to be an awesome performance from you, right? Did it feel good?
Oh man, what an awesome crowd we have here, like every year. Gracias to everyone here in Barcelona. What a result for our team. We definitely didn't expect to have the result we had today, so I just really wanted to, you know, take my hat off to my team. A big thank you to everyone back at the factory for continuing to push and bring us a little bit closer to the Bulls. They're still a bit ahead, but we'll keep chasing them down. But this is an amazing result. George did a great job today as well.
It's so cool to see the positivity, you know, also on the radio there on the in-lap and everything. How far can you still go then? I mean, huge jump there from one race to the next now suddenly. Do you think you can still give them a run for their money perhaps a bit later on?
I think this is a little bit too quick in the moment, but we're working at it. We're working at it. So just one step at a time. And if we can get close by the end of the year, that would be awesome. But if not, next year.
And you're still flat out motivated, right? Like pushing hard, huh?
Flat out. No lifting.
Good to see. I'll see if I can get a word with George. George, P3 for you after quite a difficult day yesterday. Are you surprised in a way?
A little bit surprised for sure. I think, yeah, kudos to the team for giving me a really great car today. I mean, that was a fun race for us, starting from P12, coming all the way to P3. A sign of things to come, hopefully, for us and the team.
Does it actually also feel better to drive? Like, is it the best feeling you've had so far this year in the car?
Yeah, it definitely feels better, but it wasn't, you know, you're just putting in those lap times and you're comparing with the guys around you with the Aston and the Ferraris, and we were just quicker and quicker and quicker. So we know we brought some more downforce to the car. We know things were in a better window. So, yeah, really pleased to be on the podium.
All right, well, congratulations to you, George, and congratulations to the team for such progress.
Gracias.
Well, good insight there from our top three. Nico Rosberg doing the questioning, and Max Verstappen straight over to celebrate with Adrian Newey and Christian Horner and the rest of the team. Dr. Helmut Marko watching on, the Red Bull advisor, Christian Horner, the team principal, and Adrian Newey, the force behind the design of the Red Bull cars for quite some time now. Mark, what did you make of that in the end then? What were the standouts? We all knew that Verstappen was probably going to win this race, but I don't think we could have predicted a double Mercedes podium.
Yeah, that's the standout positive, is just how well both Mercedes did. And we know this is a good track for them. They've had lots of success here in the past, had a really good solid weekend here last year, in fact, almost to the point where they were almost lulled into a bit of a false sense of security last year and thinking that maybe they'd fixed their problems, only to find as they went further on in the season that they hadn't. So let's not get ahead of ourselves in terms of all their issues are fixed, but it is a real positive. Lots of upgrades on that car for Monaco, a real test this time out on the Barcelona track, so all looking good for them. I guess the biggest negative surprise, if you like, was exactly the opposite of that at Ferrari, where they also brought great big upgrades, and we just didn't see any step forward from them.
Absolutely. Well, we go again in a couple of weeks' time in Canada as the track starts to get invaded. But Max Verstappen then leads the Drivers' Championship standings, 170 points to Perez's 117. That means there's a 53-point gap now. Alonso is third, Hamilton fourth, and Russell is fifth. The two Ferraris, Linus third and sixth and seventh. With that double podium finish, Mercedes move ahead in the Constructors to second place in front of Aston Martin. Red Bull still raging away with it at the front, 287 points to their name. But it was Max Verstappen who took his 40th career win here at the scene where he took his first race win back in 2016 with Red Bull, in front of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Sergio Perez was fourth, Carlos Sainz rounds out the top five, Lance Stroll, Alonso, Ocon, Zhou Guanyu and Pierre Gasly steals the final point just in front of Leclerc, who came oh so close but nothing to reward his hard efforts from the pit lane. 11th only for the Monegasque in front of Tsunoda, who had a 5-second time penalty. Piastri, Nick De Vries, Nico Hulkenberg the top 15, Albon, Norris, who had damage in turn 1 and never really recovered, into 17th in front of Magnussen, Bottas and Logan Sargent 20th and last in a Spanish Grand Prix that did provide intrigue, certainly with the tyre strategy and certainly with cars out of position, but in the end it was another same old story of Max Verstappen winning, Steve.
Yeah, no home glory for the Spanish then at the Spanish Grand Prix. There might be some Spanish joy in the tennis later on this afternoon, though. We're going to bring you full commentary in around about 15-20 minutes time of Carlos Alcaraz, the world number one, against Lorenzo Musetti of Italy at the French Open at Roland Garros. Just to tell you, in the last few moments, Novak Djokovic has booked his place in the quarterfinals, beating the Peruvian Juan Pablo Varillas in straight sets. We'll be back on the clay at Roland Garros shortly, but let's wrap up the Spanish Grand Prix first of all with Harry Benjamin and Mark Priestley. Harry, when he was on his team radio then at the end of the race, he laughed Max Verstappen and said, yes, just within the limits, which could really be the title of his autobiography. It's where he lives, isn't it? It's where he thrives.
Just within the limits, and occasionally a little bit over. I mean, that was all because of the track limits infringements, and he did indeed. It's a 3 strikes and you're almost out, because then after the third one you get a black and white flag, and that is really your final warning. After that, well, a penalty is going to come your way, which is what the team were very worried about. But in the end, he had it in hand, and he wanted the fastest lap. He didn't need it, his teammate had it, and Verstappen had a healthy gap and was going to take 25 points. But in the end, Max Verstappen being Max Verstappen, he wanted 26 points and he got them.
Yeah, this is the Dutch national anthem playing in the background, and you think of the Olympic Games and when an athlete wins a gold medal and they're in tears, but Max Verstappen has heard this 40 times now, Mark, and even in his post-race interview, you know, it's expected now, isn't it? And it has been for a long time, in fairness.
Well, it is expected, but this is a result of the hard work of a lot of people, 800 or so people working behind the scenes to give him and the team this opportunity. And I think I said this earlier on in the broadcast, you've got to take your hats off to them. They, you know, the outside world are looking on thinking, I wish someone else could just win. But actually, the team have just done an incredible job. And what this proves, this is the standard for everyone else to match. He's not done something that's outrageous, that's given him an advantage over everybody else. It's everybody else that now needs to step up and do the job that Red Bull have been doing. That's what Formula One needs. It doesn't need to peg Max Verstappen back. It needs the others to do a good enough job to match.
This is the end, of course, of the Austrian national anthem for the constructors for Red Bull, who continue to be absolutely dominant. Christian Horner, the team principal, looking on with that sort of wry smile, which is always on his face, I think, from next to the podium. I think, Harry, it said quite a lot that Lewis Hamilton sounded happier to be second than Max Verstappen sounded to be first. That tells you the gap that they've got to work on.
Yeah, well, I always wonder if you're somebody like Max Verstappen, you know, do you get a bit bored of winning all the time? But maybe that's why I'm not a Formula One driver. Lewis Hamilton, of course, previously hugely dominant, and now the fire reignited, perhaps, in that Mercedes. It looks like they've now got a much better baseline, especially with the introduction of a new concept in car in Monaco. They get the full beam of it here in Barcelona, which is a track they're also used to. Copious amounts of testing around here, and to deliver a second and a third place for George Russell, who, remember, started outside of the top 10 and carved his way through the field. Although Mercedes say it's good, we go around well here, it's track specific, that's going to be good for the rest of the season, I think, for the Team Mercedes.
Thank you very much, guys. Great stuff. Max Verstappen has the gold medal round his neck then as he just repositions his cap, and he can go and celebrate victory yet again in this Formula One season. He is very much on course for another World Championship. Of course, that would be his third. Right.